The doctor pressed a folded note into my hand and said, "Read this when you're alone." At the time, it felt strange but not dangerous. Not yet. I waited until I locked myself inside a hospital restroom before opening it, my hands trembling for reasons I couldn't explain. And then I read it. "Do not go home with your son tonight." One sentence. No explanation. No warning signs, just that. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. Because warnings like that don't come from nothing. And suddenly, every small moment from the past few months began replaying in my mind differently. What I didn't know, what I was completely unaware of, was that everything around me had already been carefully set in motion. Conversation. Doctor visits. Quiet corrections about my memory. All of it building towards something I hadn't even realized was happening. My name is Judith Baker. I'm 68 years old. Avidov. And until that day, I believed my son was the one person I could trust without question. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from and what time it is. I read every comment. Because this isn't just a story about a note. It's about what happens when the person you trust most becomes part of a plan you were never meant to see. Now let me tell you how everything actually began. For most of my life, everything felt predictable in the best possible way. The same house, the same routine, the same quiet sense of safety that came from knowing exactly where you belonged. My husband, Thomas. It was that kind of man, the kind who made life feel steady without needing to say much. He fixed things before they broke, remembered small details no one else noticed, and somehow made even difficult days feel manageable. When he passed 8 months ago, the world didn't collapse all at once. It just emptied. Rooms felt larger. Nights felt longer. Silence became something I couldn't escape. That was when my son Daniel stepped in. "You shouldn't be alone." "Mom," he told me, his voice gentle. "Certain." And at the time, it sounded like love. He moved into the house with his wife, Lauren, bringing noise back into rooms that had gone quiet. He handled the lawn, fixed things around the house, took over errands I no longer had the energy for. At first, it felt like relief, like I didn't have to carry everything by myself anymore. But slowly, the help began to change shape. He started organizing my medications, saying it was easier if he kept track. He answered phone calls before I could reach them, telling me it was just to filter out unnecessary stress. At doctor visits, he began speaking for me, correcting small details, finishing my sentences, adding information I didn't remember sharing. "Mom's been a little forgetful lately," he would say with a soft smile that made it sound harmless. And I laughed it off. Because that's what you do when someone you trust rewrites small parts of your reality. You assume they're helping, not shaping something. But over time, those small corrections began to settle into something heavier. I started second-guessing myself, questioning whether I had remembered things correctly, whether I had said something wrong. And without realizing it, I began to rely on his version of events more than my own. That was how it started. Not with control, with comfort. The kind that slowly replaces your independence until you don't notice what you've lost. At first, nothing he did felt wrong. It felt thoughtful, careful, like he was stepping into the space his father had left behind, trying to hold everything together while I struggled to find my footing again. But over time, the details began to shift in ways I couldn't quite explain. My mail stopped reaching me directly, Daniel would bring it in. Already opened. Already sorted. Just bills. "Mom?" "Nothing important," he'd say, placing a small stack in front of me while the rest quietly disappeared. Bank statements became summaries, he explained instead of documents I reviewed. When I asked questions, he answered quickly, confidently, in a way that made it feel unnecessary to look deeper. And slowly, I stopped asking. Not because I trusted him completely, but because I was tired of feeling like I was falling behind in conversations I used to understand. At church, he started speaking for me more often. If someone asked how I was doing, he would answer before I could. "She's been a little forgetful," he'd say gently. Always with that same calm tone that made it sound like concern instead of something else. People nodded, smiled at me with a kind of softened expression I hadn't seen before. Not respect, not familiarity, something closer to sympathy. And that was when I started to feel it not confusion, but displacement, like I was slowly being moved out of my own life without ever being told it was happening. The hospital visit made it impossible to ignore. I felt dizzy during a service, just for a moment. But Daniel reacted immediately. Too quickly. By the time we arrived, he was already explaining my condition to the staff before anyone had asked. "She's been having memory issues. Unsettling died, the 7.ard," he said. "It's been getting worse." I remember turning to him, wanting to correct him, wanting to say that wasn't true, but the words didn't come out the way I expected. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure. Not completely. And that hesitation, that single moment of uncertainty, was all it took. Because once doubt enters your own mind about who you are, it becomes easier for someone else to define it for you. And in that moment, standing there, while doctors listened to him instead of me, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit. This wasn't just help anymore. It was control, being built quietly, carefully, one believable detail at a time. Standing alone in that hospital restroom with the note in my hand, everything I had been trying not to see suddenly became impossible to ignore. "Do not go home with your son tonight." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't concern. It was a warning. And warnings like that don't come from misunderstandings. They come from patterns someone else has already recognized. I read it again and again, trying to find another meaning. But there wasn't one. And that was when the past few months began to rearrange themselves in my mind. Not as isolated moments, but as pieces of something structured. Every time Daniel spoke for me, every time he corrected me, every time he mentioned my memory in front of others, it wasn't random. It was consistent, intentionnel, designed. And then something else clicked into place. The hospital records. If he had been telling doctors I was declining, if he had been shaping that narrative beyond just family and neighbors, then this wasn't just about perception. It was about documentation, evidence, a version of me being recorded somewhere official, the kind that doesn't just affect how people see you, but what they can legally do to you. That thought didn't feel like fear at first. It felt like clarity. Cold, precise clarity. Because suddenly, I understood what the end of that pattern looked like. If enough people believed I was losing control of my mind, if enough records supported that idea, then decisions about my life wouldn't belong to me anymore. Someone else could step in. Someone responsible. Someone trusted. Daniel. My house. My accounts. my choices. All of it could be transferred without me ever agreeing to it, as long as they could prove I wasn't capable of making those decisions myself. And for the first time in my life, I looked at my own son and saw something I had never allowed myself to see before. Not care, not protection, strategy. And that was the moment everything inside me changed. Because once you understand that someone is quietly building a case against you, you stop reacting like a mother. You start thinking like someone who needs to survive. That night, I didn't go home with him. I smiled, nodded, and told Daniel the doctor wanted to run a few more tests, watching closely as something in his expression tightened just for a second before he relaxed again and said, "Of course, Mom." That was all I needed. Confirmation doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it's in the moment someone realizes their plan might not go exactly the way they expected. I waited until he left. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I made my own decision. I called an old friend. Someone I trusted long before grief made me dependent on anyone else. Within an hour, I was out of that hospital and somewhere Daniel didn't know to look. And that was when everything began to surface. Not all at once, but enough to make the picture impossible to ignore. We checked my accounts. There were pending changes I hadn't approved. We contacted my lawyer. There was already a request submitted for power of attorney under Daniel's name. Citing concerns about my cognitive decline, medical note statements I never made had been documented in ways that supported that claim. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a plan. Structured. Detailed. Step by step. Establish cognitive instability. Limit independent decision-making. Secure legal authority. Reading those words felt like stepping outside my own life and seeing it rewritten by someone else. But the most unsettling part wasn't the plan itself. It was how calm it all was. No anger. No urgency. Just quiet execution. As if this wasn't betrayal, but responsibility. I didn't confront him immediately. I didn't need to. Because once you understand the full shape of something, you don't rush into it, you control how it ends. The next evening, when Daniel sat across from me, still believing everything was progressing exactly as he intended, I saw him differently. Not as my son. Not as someone protecting me, but as someone who had already decided my life needed to be managed without me in it. And in that moment, I realized something I never thought I would have to accept. The person I trusted most wasn't just part of the problem. He had designed it. When everything finally came to light, Daniel didn't react the way I expected. He didn't shout. He didn't deny it. He explained it. Calmly. Rationally. Like he truly believed what he had done was necessary. "You weren't safe on your own, Mom," he said. "I was just trying to help." And in that moment, I understood something far more dangerous than the plan itself. He didn't see it as control. He saw it as responsibility. That's what made it so easy for him to justify every step, every lie, every document, every quiet attempt to take my life out of my own hands. But here's the truth. No one tells you. Control rarely looks like force. It looks like care. It sounds like concern. It hides inside words that feel familiar enough to trust until it's too late. I didn't argue with him. I didn't try to convince him he was wrong. Because some people don't need to be corrected. They need to face consequences. Legally, everything was stopped. Reversed. Protected. My name stayed where it belonged on my home. On my accounts. on my life. And for the first time in months, I made decisions without someone standing beside me, shaping them into something else. Money reveals who people really are. But power reveals what they're willing to take when they think you won't fight back. I don't know if I'll ever see my son the same way again. Some lines, once crossed, don't disappear. But I do know this truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how carefully someone tries to rewrite it. So, tell me, if you were in my position, would you have trusted him or walked away that night? If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to let someone else decide who you are.